They came to the house on a Tuesday. The sympathy cards were still propped on the mantel, and the lilies someone had sent were already starting to brown at the edges. My husband, Raymond, had been dead for exactly 4 days. I want you to hold that number. 4 days. That's how long it took for his sons to decide my future. I'm Miriam. I'm 66 years old, and for 31 years I was Raymond Calloway's wife. Not his first wife, that marriage ended when his boys were in grade school, but his real one. The one he chose every single morning for 3 decades. He used to say that, "I choose you today, Miriam," every morning, coffee in hand, standing in the kitchen of the house we built together in Asheville, North Carolina. I held on to that memory while his sons sat across from me in my own living room and explained, very calmly, very professionally, exactly how little I mattered to their family's legacy. The older one is Garrett. He's 48, an investment manager out of Charlotte, with the kind of stillness that reads as confidence until you realize it's actually just indifference. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. The way he looks at you, steady, measuring, utterly unmoved, does all the work for him. The younger one is Prescott. 44, lives in Raleigh, runs what he describes as a strategic communications firm, though I'd spent years trying to understand exactly what that meant. Prescott is softer than his brother in every visible way, rounder face, warmer voice, quicker smile, but Prescott's warmth is a tool. I'd learned that over the years. Every kind word he ever said to me had a function. They sat side by side on my sofa, Raymond's sofa, the one he'd picked out himself at an estate sale in Brevard, and they had a folder between them. Miriam, Garrett began, we know the timing isn't ideal. Ideal, as though there were a polite window of grief, after which business could resume. Dad's estate is more complex than you might realize, Prescott added, leaning forward slightly. His voice had that particular quality of someone delivering bad news while framing it as concern. He had a lot of moving parts. Properties, accounts, the portfolio. We want to make sure everything is handled properly. I asked them what they meant by properly. Garrett opened the folder. The house in Asheville, the one Raymond and I had poured ourselves into for 22 years. The one where we'd repainted the kitchen 3 times until we found the right shade of yellow. The one with the garden I'd built from scratch in the backyard. That house was valued at approximately $920. Per Raymond's estate documents, it would pass jointly to Garrett and Prescott. The mountain cabin in Weaverville, 40 minutes north, where Raymond and I spent every October for the last 15 years. Watching the leaves turn and drinking cider on the porch. $480, also to Garrett and Prescott. The investment accounts. The art collection Raymond had assembled over decades. The vintage vehicle Raymond kept in climate-controlled storage because he loved it too much to ever actually drive it. All of it, Garrett and Prescott. I would receive the proceeds from a life insurance policy. They slid a single page across the coffee table. $175. We know it's not what you were expecting, Prescott said, but Dad was very clear in his wishes. He wanted the family assets to remain consolidated within his bloodline. Bloodline. I had cooked Raymond's dinners. I had managed his doctors, his medications, his fear when the diagnosis came. I had held his hand through 3 surgeries and sat alone in waiting rooms at 2 in the morning because Garrett and Prescott were too busy to make the drive. I had loved their father completely and been loved completely in return. Or so I had believed. And now I was being told that 31 years of that love equated to $175 and a request to vacate. There's also the matter of some outstanding medical expenses, Garrett said. His tone did not change. Raymond's final treatment involved some specialized care that insurance didn't fully cover. The outstanding balance is approximately $165, given that you were his spouse and participated in the care decisions. The medical providers are looking to you for resolution. $175 in. $165 out. $10,000 to start over at 66. I looked at them both. These men who had called me Miriam when they wanted to be polite and nothing at all when they didn't. And I said the only thing I could manage. I need some time. Garrett closed the folder. Of course. But the estate timeline does have some structure. We'd ask that you begin making arrangements within the next 30 days. We want to be reasonable about the transition. Reasonable. My husband was 4 days dead and his sons were being reasonable. They left, and I sat alone in the yellow kitchen until the sun went all the way down. There was a moment, somewhere around midnight, when I almost called my sister in Knoxville. She'd never liked Raymond, not because of anything he'd done, but because she'd lost a brother-in-law when I married him. And she'd never quite forgiven me for choosing a life she didn't understand. But that night I wanted her voice badly. Instead, I went through Raymond's desk. Not for any particular reason. Just because it was his. And being near his things felt like being near him. His reading glasses in the top drawer. A coffee ring on the blotter from a mug he'd used so often the ring had become permanent. A small ceramic dish where he dropped his keys every night. A habit so reliable I could set a clock by the sound of them landing. Beneath a folded document, a property tax receipt from 2 years ago, my fingers found something that didn't belong. A small brass key, heavier than it looked, worn to a soft shine along the teeth from years of handling. I had never seen this key. I had been in Raymond's desk hundreds of times, and this key had never been there. I held it under the desk lamp and turned it slowly. It wasn't a house key. Too small. A padlock? A drawer? I tried every locked thing in the room. Nothing. The key went into my bathrobe pocket. And I went to bed. And I did not sleep. My attorney is a woman named Carol Huang. She's been practicing estate law in Asheville for 27 years. And she has the particular quality of people who have seen every version of human behavior and are still, somehow, not cynical. She met with me the morning after Garrett and Prescott's visit and listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "We can contest this," she said. I asked what that would look like. "Months. At minimum. Possibly years. The will has irregularities, the timing of the final revision, the circumstances of Raymond's illness. There are questions we could raise. Legitimate questions. And while we're raising them?" She looked at me steadily. "You'd be funding the fight on $175. Which, given the medical debts they're assigning to you, means you'd have roughly $10,000 to live on during the entire process." I had known that was coming. But hearing it out loud still landed differently. "What if I don't fight?" I asked. "What if I simply agree to what they're asking?" Carol set her pen down. "Miriam, I need you to understand what you'd be walking away from." "I understand." "Do you?" She leaned forward. "In 27 years, I have never once recommended that a client voluntarily surrender a claim of this size without exhausting every option. What you're describing would mean." I know what it would mean. I met her eyes. How quickly could it be done? If I simply signed whatever they needed and walked away cleanly. How fast? She studied me for a long time. The kind of study that goes past the surface. 2 weeks, she said finally, if they agree to absorb the medical debts into the estate before distribution. You'd walk away with the full insurance payout. But Miriam, once you sign, there is no recourse. If something comes to light afterward, something that would have changed your position, you'd have no legal standing. I thanked her and asked her to begin drafting the language. She looked at me the way someone looks at a person they suspect knows something they're not saying. She wasn't wrong. The key opened a safety deposit box at Blue Ridge Community Bank on Merriman Avenue. I found the account number on a business card tucked into the inner pocket of Raymond's good winter coat. The charcoal one he wore to dinners and concerts and the memorial service for his old business partner 2 winters ago. The card was from the bank. On the back, in Raymond's handwriting, B214. Only Miriam. Patricia at the bank was gentle and professional and offered me water twice. Which I declined both times. She led me down to the vault and left me alone. The box was larger than I'd anticipated. I lifted the lid. It was full. Not of cash. Raymond was never melodramatic. It was full of documents. Organized in labeled folders the way Raymond organized everything. with the methodical precision of a man who believed that information was the only real currency. There were printed emails, financial records, a private investigation report from someone named Douglas Ashworth, licensed Pi, Buncombe County, and on top of everything, a sealed envelope with my name on it in Raymond's handwriting. The instruction written below my name said, "Read the others first." So I did. The first folder was labeled Correspondence, Garrett. Printed emails, recent, between Garrett and someone named Neil Pruitt. The timestamps placed them 8 and 9 months ago, while Raymond was in his second round of treatment and I was sleeping in a hospital recliner 3 nights a week. Neil, Dad's getting worse. The pulmonologist is saying 6 months. Maybe less. We need the restructuring done before he dies or the whole position changes. Can you push the paperwork through this week? The accounts are already positioned. Once the transfer documents are signed, the investment assets move under Callaway Capital Partners LLC. The residential properties follow upon probate. The wife won't know what she's looking at. She's not financially sophisticated. By the time she figures out there's a discrepancy, the window will have closed. I read it twice. Then I set it down very carefully and picked up the next folder. Prescott's folder was worse. Prescott, it turned out, was not running a communications firm. He was running a scheme, a series of high-yield investment vehicles marketed specifically to retirees and pre-retirees in the Research Triangle. The Pi's report detailed 17 clients who had collectively lost $410. 3 of them had filed complaints with the NC Securities Division. The investigation was ongoing. Prescott had been aware of the investigation for 4 months. He needed money, significant money, to make the complaints go away quietly and fund the legal costs of the cases he couldn't make disappear. He needed his inheritance, and he needed it fast. The next document was a bank statement for an account I had never heard of. Raymond Callaway Private Trust, administered through a wealth management firm in Charlotte. The balance, $3.9 million. Below the statement was a handwritten note from Raymond. "Miriam, this is real. This is ours. I moved it here a year ago when I started to understand what the boys were planning. They think all my money is in the house and the portfolio. It is not. The portfolio they see is a fraction. The rest is here, and only you can access it. $3.9 million. We weren't struggling. We had never been struggling. And Raymond had known, while I was driving him to treatments. While I was learning how to administer his medications. While I was declining invitations and skipping my book club and building my entire world around keeping him alive. He had known that his sons were waiting for him to die so they could take everything. I sat in that small, windowless room for a very long time. There was more. A forensic accountant's report showing that Garrett had forged Raymond's signature on 3 separate loan documents over the past 18 months. Using Raymond's business interests as collateral for investment positions that had subsequently collapsed. Garrett owed approximately $290 to institutional creditors and was actively managing the timeline of his father's death alongside the timeline of his own financial exposure. 2 sons, 2 different methods, both stealing from their dying father, both counting on me to be too grief-stricken and too financially ignorant to notice. I opened Raymond's letter last. My love. If you are reading this, it means I ran out of time before I could tell you in person. And I am sorry for that. I wanted to be there when you found all of this. I wanted to hold your hand. I need you to know something. I never stopped choosing you. Not once. Not for a single day. What Garrett and Prescott are doing, or will do after I'm gone, is not a surprise to me. I've been watching it come for almost 2 years. I thought I could talk to them. I tried, but some people can't be reached. And eventually you have to stop trying to reach them and start protecting the people who matter. The house and the cabin have mortgages on them now that they don't know about. I took them out 6 months ago. The house carries $1.4 million in liens. The cabin, $520. Both properties are worth less than what's owed. I did this intentionally. If they want those properties, they can have them. They will also have the debt that comes with them. Debt they cannot refinance given what Douglas found in their financial histories. The real will is held by an attorney named Susan Venable. She practices in Black Mountain, 20 minutes east of us. She has been holding it since October and has instructions to contact you within 48 hours of my death. I don't know why she hasn't reached you yet, if you are finding this more than 2 days after the funeral. Something went wrong, and you should call her immediately. Her number is on the card clipped to this letter. The will leaves everything to you. The choice of whether to give Garrett and Prescott anything at all is yours. Completely. I trust you to decide what they deserve. Please don't be sad too long. The garden needs you. All my love. Every day. Forever, Raymond. I called Susan Venable from the parking lot of the bank. She answered on the second ring and said, "Mrs. Calloway, I have been trying to reach you for 3 days. I sent a certified letter to the house and left 2 voicemails on a number that appears to have been disconnected." Raymond's cell phone. I had turned it off myself. I hadn't been able to listen to his voicemail greeting one more time without breaking down. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't know." "There's nothing to apologize for," she said, and her voice was kind in the way of someone accustomed to delivering news that changes everything. "Can you come to my office this afternoon?" Susan Venable's office was in a converted Victorian on Cherry Street in Black Mountain, with bookshelves that went to the ceiling and a window overlooking a small creek. She was in her early 50s, sharp and unhurried, the kind of attorney who had seen complicated families and did not find them remarkable. She walked me through everything methodically. The real will, executed 6 weeks before Raymond's death, was unambiguous. The entirety of Raymond's estate passed to me. The document Garrett and Prescott had been working from was a version Raymond had revoked 18 months prior. "How did they get it?" I asked. "Your husband believed someone at his former law firm provided it," Susan said. "He didn't know whether it was deliberate or negligent, so he didn't pursue it. He simply moved everything to me and made sure the old firm had no current information." She spread additional documents across her desk. The forensic accountant's work, the PI's report, a second life insurance policy I had not known about, $280, in addition to the $175 the boys had mentioned. Raymond had taken it out quietly, 18 months ago, and named only me as beneficiary. "What Garrett and Prescott don't know," Susan said, "is that the properties they think they're inheriting have liens that exceed their market value. Assuming the current real estate market, they would inherit negative equity of approximately $520 between the 2 properties, plus whatever deficiency balance remains after any forced sale." I was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the creek moved steadily over its stones. "And the fraud findings," I said, "the forgeries, Prescott's investment scheme, can those be pursued criminally?" "Yes," Susan said. "We have sufficient documentation for referral to the DA's office for Garrett's forgeries. And the NC Securities Division investigation into Prescott is already active. If you chose to cooperate with investigators and submit what Douglas Ashworth compiled, it would significantly strengthen both cases." I looked at the documents spread out before me, evidence of 2 men's careful, calculated destruction of their own father's trust. I thought about Raymond in those final months, managing all of this quietly, protecting me while I thought I was the one protecting him. "What I want," I said, "is for them to live with what they chose. I don't want to spend the next 3 years in courtrooms, but I want them to have the inheritance they were so determined to claim." Susan smiled, not widely, just enough. "I can make that happen," she said. They wanted dinner. Of course they wanted dinner. The text came from Prescott the following evening. Warm and familial. "Miriam, we thought it would be nice to get together before we finalize things. Garrett's in town through the weekend. We'd love to take you to dinner, somewhere you love. Your choice." My choice. How generous. I said yes. I suggested a place in downtown Asheville that Raymond and I had loved for years. A small Italian restaurant called Palermo's where the owner knew us by name and always brought an Amaro after dinner without being asked. I thought Raymond would have appreciated the setting. Garrett and Prescott were already there when I arrived. They stood when I walked in, which was a practiced courtliness that I had learned Over 31 years. To distrust completely. Garrett ordered a bottle of wine without asking if I wanted it. Prescott complimented the restaurant with the air of someone who had just Googled it in the parking lot. We made the necessary small talk. How was I sleeping? Was I eating? Had I thought about what I would do next? Travel. Perhaps I should think about something restorative. They were both very concerned about me. I've been going through Raymond's office, I said, eventually, between the appetizers and the pasta. A small shift in Garrett's posture. Barely perceptible. It's hard to know what's important and what isn't, I continued. He was meticulous, but some of the financial documents are confusing to me. Accounts I didn't know about. Correspondence I don't understand. What kind of accounts? Prescott asked, and his voice had the careful flatness of someone working to sound casual. I honestly couldn't say. Some of the account names don't match anything I recognized. And there was a safety deposit key. I found it just yesterday. Actually, I haven't had a chance to look into it yet. The silence at the table lasted approximately 1 second longer than it should have. Garrett reached for his wine glass. You shouldn't have to deal with all of that alone. Prescott and I can go through everything with you. We know Dad's financial world much better than you'd expect. That's very kind, I said. I might take you up on that. But I watched Garrett's hand on his wine glass. The knuckles, ever so slightly, were white. After dinner, walking to our separate cars, Prescott lingered beside me in the parking lot. Miriam, he said, his voice dropping to something private and sincere. I know this hasn't been easy. And I know Garrett can come across as businesslike. But we really do want what's best for you. Dad would want us to take care of you. He really would, I agreed. Prescott hugged me before he got in his car. It was a good hug, practiced and warm, with just the right amount of pressure. I watched his taillights disappear and thought about Raymond's letter. Some people can't be reached. He had known his sons for 44 and 48 years. He was right. Susan Venable had prepared the paperwork beautifully. The signing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in Carol Huang's conference room. At my request, because Carol was someone Garrett and Prescott trusted, which made her the right venue for what was coming. I arrived early. Susan arrived with me. Carol looked between us with the expression of someone who has realized the shape of a situation and is choosing to see where it goes. Garrett and Prescott arrived at exactly 10 o'clock. Their own attorney, a man named Whitfield, young, ambitious, and entirely unprepared, trailing behind them. They arranged themselves across the table with the ease of men who believed they were about to conclude a transaction that had already been decided. We appreciate you making this easy, Garrett said, nodding at me. I know Raymond would want this to be as smooth as possible. I'm sure he would, I said. Susan opened her briefcase. Whitfield, the young attorney, frowned. I'm sorry, and you are? Susan Venable. I represent Mrs. Calloway's interests in the matter of the Raymond Calloway estate. She paused, and before we proceed to any signing, there are some documents I need to place into the record. Garrett's face did not move. Prescott's did, just barely. What documents? Garrett said. The final and legally operative will of Raymond Douglas Calloway, executed October 14th of last year. She placed it on the table, along with its associated exhibits. Whitfield picked it up and began reading. The color left his face somewhere around the second paragraph. This supersedes the document you've been working from, Susan said, which was revoked 18 months ago. The estate, in its entirety, passes to Miriam Calloway. That's not possible, Garrett said, but the word possible sounded different than it had 5 minutes ago. Mr. Calloway documented the revocation thoroughly. Additionally, Susan placed a second set of documents on the table. I have here a forensic accounting report regarding certain loan instruments that bear your father's signature. Mr. Calloway. Garrett went absolutely still. The signatures have been examined by a certified document analyst. Susan continued. The determination is that they are not consistent with your father's actual signature and are likely forgeries. Whitfield leaned toward Garrett and said something very quietly. Garrett did not respond. There's also the matter of the properties, Susan said. Both the Asheville residence and the Weaverville cabin carry mortgage obligations that, as of last month, exceed market value. The estate can gift these properties to whomever it chooses. In this case, Mrs. Calloway is choosing to gift them to you and your brother. As per your original request. She slid 2 documents across the table. Deed transfers. Both in order. Both legal. Prescott picked his up. Read it slowly. Set it down. We'd own them, he said, very carefully, but we'd also own the outstanding debt. Yes, the liens transfer with title, given current market conditions and the specific terms of the existing mortgages. Refinancing would require credit profiles that, Susan paused, and in that pause was something that was almost but not quite sympathy, may present challenges for both of you. The room was quiet for a long moment. Whitfield asked if he could step outside to make a phone call. He did not come back for 12 minutes. When he returned, he sat down and said to Garrett, quietly, I need to advise you to consider your options here very carefully. Garrett looked at me for the first time since the documents had landed. Really looked, the way he hadn't since the day he'd told me I had 30 days to leave my own home. What do you want? He asked. I thought about how to answer that. I want you to take what you asked for, I said, the properties, exactly as you requested them. And I want you to understand that your father knew. He knew everything, and he loved you anyway, enough to let you live with your choices instead of putting you in prison. Prescott made a sound that might have been the beginning of a word. It didn't become one. There is one other matter, Susan said, placing the final document on the table. Mr. Prescott Calloway, the NC Securities Division has an active inquiry into investment vehicles marketed through your firm. The materials we have compiled significantly expand the documented scope of that inquiry. Mrs. Calloway is prepared to cooperate with investigators fully. Or, she met Prescott's eyes, to limit her cooperation to what has already been submitted. If that serves the parties involved. Prescott looked at the table. What does limiting cooperation look like? It looks like you and your brother accepting these transfers today, in writing, waiving all further claims against the estate, and agreeing that there will be no further contact with Mrs. Calloway except through legal counsel. It took another 40 minutes. There were conversations in the hallway. Another phone call from Whitfield. One moment when I thought Garrett was going to stand up and walk out. He didn't. They signed. All of it, the property transfers with the attached debt. The waiver of estate claims. The no-contact agreement. Garrett didn't speak to me again before he left. Prescott paused at the door and looked back at me with an expression I didn't have a name for. Not regret. Exactly. Not anger. Something quieter and more complicated. He really planned all of this, Prescott said. It wasn't a question. From the moment he understood what you were doing. I said, he was always smarter than you gave him credit for. Prescott nodded once, and then he was gone. Carol Huang sat back in her chair and looked at me with something between admiration and exasperation. You knew, she said, the day you came to me and said you wanted to sign everything over. You already knew. I suspected, I said. I didn't know yet, but I knew Raymond. I spent the following 2 months in the house on the mountain, my house. Though I was already beginning to understand I would not stay. The garden needed attention, and I gave it everything. The roses Raymond and I had planted the summer we moved in were overgrown and needed hard pruning. I cut them back further than felt comfortable. The following spring, my neighbor told me, they would bloom more abundantly than ever. I found a cottage in Brevard, 28 miles west, at the edge of a land trust that would never be developed. It sat at the end of a gravel road with a covered porch and a creek that ran through the back of the property. It cost $680, which I paid in cash and barely noticed spending. Word reached me through Carol, who heard it from Whitfield, who had apparently stayed in touch. The Asheville house went into foreclosure 8 weeks after Garrett and Prescott took the deed transfer. The cabin followed within the month. The deficiency balances, the gap between what the properties sold for and what was owed on them, created a combined liability that, added to Garrett's existing debts and Prescott's legal exposure, effectively ended their financial lives as they had been living them. Garrett closed his firm in Charlotte. His name appeared in a business filing as a financial consultant for a small accounting firm in Kannapolis. The kind of firm no one from his former life would have worked at. Prescott reached a settlement with the securities division, partial restitution. A bar from financial services work for 5 years. No criminal charges. He moved back to his mother's house in Greenville, South Carolina, for a period. I heard later he was working in commercial insurance. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. What I felt, in those early weeks, was something closer to the particular exhaustion that comes after a long fever breaks. Not well, exactly, but no longer sick. The clarity came gradually, the way it usually does. There was a woman in Brevard, Joanna, a retired social worker who had become something like a friend through the garden club I joined that fall, who told me one afternoon, while we were dividing hostas in her side yard, that she had spent 4 years after her mother's death sorting through the damage her siblings had done to her mother's estate. The lawyers got most of what should have come to me, she said matter-of-factly. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was that nobody believed me. Everybody thought I was exaggerating. I told her I understood. She looked at me sideways. So I told her the rest. She was quiet for a long time after. Then she said, "Do you know how many women in this county are going through something exactly like that right now? Widows, mostly, some divorced, women who trusted the people around them and got destroyed for it." I told her I thought I did know. "There's a legal aid organization in Asheville," she said. "They work with financial abuse cases. But they're underfunded. Every time they take on a complicated estate case, they can't take 3 other cases." I drove to Asheville the following week and met with the organization's director, a woman named Christine. Early 40s, relentless and underpaid and very good at her work. I told her about Raymond. I told her about the safety deposit box and the brass key and the careful plans of a man who had loved me enough to build an escape route I hadn't known I needed. Then I told her about the endowment I wanted to establish. The Raymond Calloway Fund for Estate Justice opened the following spring, housed within the legal aid organization, specifically to support estate and financial abuse cases involving surviving spouses and domestic partners. The initial endowment was $800. Enough to fund 3 full-time staff positions and a case assistance fund for 7 years. Christine shook my hand at the signing and said, "Do you want to say anything?" For the record? I thought about Raymond in his good winter coat, the business card in the inside pocket, the handwriting on the back, *B214, only Miriam. "He chose me," I said, "every single day. I just want to make sure other women get to be chosen too." It's been 2 years now since Garrett and Prescott sat across from me in my own living room and told me what I was worth. I walk the creek path behind the cottage most mornings. The land trust means the property next to mine will never be built on. And in the early light, with the water moving over the rocks and the herons standing in their still, patient way at the edge of the bank, it's difficult to believe the world contains the kind of ugliness I saw in those 2 months. But it does. I know it does, because Christine calls me every few weeks to tell me about a new case, a widow in Henderson whose stepchildren forged her late husband's business documents. A woman in Marshall whose adult children from her first marriage transferred her house out of the estate before the ink was dry on the death certificate. They are everywhere, these stories. They just need someone willing to take them seriously. I am still learning who I am when I'm not someone's wife. 31 years is a long time to organize yourself around another person. And Raymond was someone worth organizing around. But I'm finding out, slowly, that there is a Miriam who exists independent of all of that. She likes the creek at 7 in the morning. She has opinions about roses. She is angrier at injustice than she used to let herself be. And less patient with people who mistake her kindness for softness. Raymond knew her, I think. He saw her clearly even when she couldn't see herself. That is the inheritance he actually left me. The key is in a small dish on my kitchen windowsill, where I can see it when I drink my morning coffee. I don't know why I kept it. It doesn't open anything anymore. But some mornings I pick it up, and it's warm in my hand. And that's enough.